It was the kind of Oregon morning that clung to your skin, cold, gray, thick with mist rolling in from the Pacific. Rebecca Hayes sat alone in her battered pickup, the dashboard clock blinking 6:07 as she rolled down the narrow county road. Each twist brought her closer to the place she'd only seen in sepia-toned photos and half-forgotten childhood dreams. Her companion in the truck bed was Thunder, a mustang as weathered and wary as she was, his dark mane flecked with gray, his intelligent eyes scanning the shifting tree line with every bump in the road. Rebecca had never planned to return to the coast. After 2 tours overseas, her world had shrunk to small apartments, crowded VA waiting rooms, and long evenings spent pacing the perimeter of her existence. The only steady thing had been Thunder, the Mustang no one else could tame. The one she'd rescued on a whim at a Bureau of Land Management auction years ago. People joked the horse had more medals than she did, and in a way, it was true. Thunder had seen her through panic attacks, restless nights, even the funeral of her last living relative. He was her shadow and her shield, the one who never asked for more than she could give. Now, as she crested the last rise and the roofline of the Turner Ranch appeared through the fog, a strange mix of nostalgia and regret pressed on her chest. The property looked even more neglected than she'd feared. Blackberry vines choked the old post and rail fencing. The main house sagged against a wind-blown stand of pine. Roof tiles scattered in the mud like lost teeth. The barn doors hung half off their hinges. No signs of life, no laughter, just the soft drip of rain and the faint echo of a place that time had left behind. Rebecca parked beneath the gnarled remains of a willow tree and climbed out, boots squelching in the mud. Thunder unloaded himself with a snort and stretched, shaking off the road dust. For a moment, she stood there, breathing in the damp, briny air, letting old memories flicker through her mind. Summer days spent racing Sam Turner's kids along the pasture, helping muck out stalls, listening to the old man's stories about horses with more grit than sense. But Sam was gone now, and the ranch had come to her not out of love, but necessity. The lawyer's letter, still folded in her coat pocket, was blunt. Sam Turner had left everything to her, for reasons she still didn't fully grasp. The will included the house, the barn, 50 acres of overgrown pasture, and a pile of debts she wasn't sure she wanted to inherit. At 43, Rebecca felt both too old and too young to be starting over. She made a slow circuit of the yard, picking her way around thistles and fallen branches. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by Thunder's steady hoofbeats and the distant cry of a gull. She saw the old hitching post, the rusted weather vane, the faded horseshoe nailed above the barn door. Everything seemed trapped in a kind of suspended animation, waiting for someone, her, to decide what came next. Rebecca's heart twisted with indecision. Sell it all and walk away, like any sensible person would? The market for rundown ranches was bleak, but she could use the cash, pay off her own debts, maybe even leave the state for good. But there was something in the way the fog clung to the paddocks, something in the shape of the land and the faint memory of Sam's laugh that made it hard to turn her back. She led Thunder into the barn, surprised to find it emptier than expected. No bales of hay, no equipment, just dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light and the sharp tang of mold. Thunder sniffed the air and pawed the ground, uneasy. Rebecca rubbed his neck absently, her own nerves frayed by the ghosts of the place. Upstairs in the house, she found more evidence of abandonment. Furniture draped in sheets, mail piled in yellowing stacks, one window cracked and letting in a thin trickle of rainwater. She wandered through the rooms, touching the walls, feeling the weight of years pressed into every floorboard. In Sam's study, the only personal touch was a faded photograph. Sam, a younger Rebecca, and a bay colt with Thunder's distinctive white star. Rebecca returned to the porch and sat on the steps, the wood creaking under her weight. She pulled the lawyer's letter out and read it again, tracing the neat typeface with a finger. "I trust you, Rebecca. You're the only one who'll understand what this place means." But what did it mean? To anyone else, the Turner Ranch was a liability. To her, it was a puzzle with missing pieces, a tangle of memory, debt, and hope. She watched Thunder as he moved restlessly along the fence line, ears flicking, always alert. The horse seemed more attuned to the land than she was, as if sensing something she couldn't see. As the afternoon faded into a bruised purple dusk, Rebecca weighed her options. Stay and fight for a place that had all but forgotten her, or cut her losses and run before she became as lost as Sam had been. She knew what everyone back in town would say, that she was chasing ghosts, looking for redemption in a pile of rotting wood and wild grass. But as she watched Thunder pause at the edge of the old storage barn, his body tense and eyes fixed on something in the shadows, Rebecca felt the first prick of curiosity spark beneath her exhaustion. Maybe there was something worth saving here, something she hadn't yet uncovered. For now, she would stay, just for the night. One more night in a place that still remembered her name. The morning after her arrival, Rebecca woke to the low, insistent rumble of the ocean mingling with the muffled noises of the ranch. A heavy fog hugged the ground, erasing the horizon, turning everything ghostly white. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming, caught between her restless past and the uncertain present. But Thunder's impatient snort from the yard below pulled her fully awake. She slipped into her old jeans, shrugged on a flannel shirt, and made her way outside, boots crunching over damp gravel. Thunder was already at work, nose down, pacing with deliberate purpose along the edge of the weathered storage barn. His tail flicked, his ears pinned back, every muscle alert. Rebecca watched him, remembering all the times his instincts had saved them both, from flash floods in Nevada to the quiet approach of coyotes on the open range. But here, in this place haunted by absence, his agitation felt different, sharper, almost urgent. She let him lead her toward the barn. As she drew closer, she noticed the strange pattern of his movements. Thunder would circle the same patch of earth, pawing furiously at the ground, then stop and toss his head as if frustrated by something just beyond reach. Rebecca frowned, running a hand over the warped boards. At first, she saw only moss and rot, but then her eyes landed on a curious mark near the bottom beam, a faded, almost hand-drawn symbol etched into the wood. It looked like an old brand, half erased by weather and time, a circle bisected by a jagged lightning bolt, barely visible beneath layers of grime. She traced the symbol with her thumb, a shiver running through her even though the air was still. The barn itself seemed to groan in response, as if the structure remembered secrets best left buried. Thunder pawed at the earth with renewed vigor, snorting and blowing, while Rebecca tried to calm him. But something in the way his muscles tensed told her to take his instincts seriously. She made a mental note to bring a shovel later, just in case. By noon, the fog had thinned, but the sky remained bruised and heavy. Rebecca walked the length of the fence line, searching for other signs of disturbance. She spotted a cluster of broken branches near the east paddock, as if someone, or something, had crashed through the thicket recently. For a fleeting second, She felt the eyes of the land watching her, cataloging her every move. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the scent of old hay and mildew. Rebecca's boots kicked up dust as she explored the dim space. She ran her fingers along the beams, searching for more markings, but found only a few faded initials and an old calendar pinned to a wall, its pages curled and yellowed. Yet, near the door where Thunder had fixated, she spotted more oddities, a series of shallow gouges in the wood, almost claw-like, radiating from the same spot. It was as if someone had tried to pry up the floorboards years ago, then gave up or was interrupted. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores and uncertainty. Rebecca cleaned what she could, stacking firewood and hauling buckets of water, trying to breathe new life into the ranch through small, stubborn acts. But her mind kept circling back to Thunder's agitation, and the cryptic symbol burned into the barn's bones. As dusk fell, the wind picked up, howling through the eaves, rattling loose shingles on the roof. Thunder grew more unsettled with every passing hour, refusing to settle in his makeshift stall. He paced, he whinnied, his hooves striking sparks on the stone floor. Rebecca, exhausted and shivering, decided it was safer to sleep in the barn with him. Just for one night, she told herself, for old time's sake and for Thunder's peace of mind. But peace would not come. The storm arrived suddenly, crashing in from the sea with the fury of a beast. Rain battered the tin roof, thunder rolled over the land, and lightning turned the barn windows into jagged, flickering mirrors. With every flash, Thunder's agitation grew. He circled the same patch of floor, nostrils flaring, body tense as wire. Rebecca felt the weight of the storm pressing down on them both, as if the old ranch was waking up after years of uneasy sleep. She tried to distract herself, humming old songs and counting seconds between lightning strikes. But her thoughts always returned to the strange markings, the broken earth beneath Thunder's hooves, the sense that something important was hidden just below the surface, something that didn't want to be forgotten. The barn felt alive, almost sentient, its shadows lengthening and shifting with the storm. When a gust of wind ripped the door off its hinges, Rebecca leapt to secure it, heart pounding. She wrapped her arms around Thunder's neck, whispering promises she barely believed. "We'll look in the morning. I swear," she said, hoping that would calm him, or maybe herself. As the storm raged into the night, Rebecca knew that tomorrow would bring answers she wasn't sure she wanted, but the time for running had passed. The ranch, Thunder, and whatever secrets lay beneath that battered barn floor, all of it now belonged to her. By dawn, the storm had spent itself, leaving behind a hush so complete it felt almost reverent. Rebecca, who hadn't really slept, stood inside the barn with Thunder, both of them shaken but unharmed. Shafts of weak sunlight struggled through the battered roof, illuminating swirls of dust in the still air. The storm had changed the ranch, branches torn from trees, puddles pooling in the yard, the barn's door hanging by a single rusted hinge. But it was the air inside the barn, thick with anticipation, that felt most different. As if the land itself was holding its breath. Thunder, still keyed up from the night before, pawed restlessly at the same spot on the floor as soon as Rebecca unlatched his stall. She watched, the memory of his strange behavior echoing through her mind. She approached slowly, crouching beside him, and placed a palm on the worn wooden floorboards. There, beneath her hand, was the faint outline of a seam, subtle, nearly invisible, but unmistakably out of place. Rebecca fetched a crowbar from the old tack room and knelt again. With careful effort, she wedged the tip into the crack. Thunder hovered nearby, his breath warming her shoulder, as if urging her on. The board creaked, groaned, and finally popped free with a reluctant snap. Beneath it, dust spiraled up, revealing a small, square trapdoor set flush with the earth. Her pulse quickened. This was no random patch of damage, but something purposefully concealed. She brushed away the dirt, revealing a tarnished brass ring. The trapdoor itself was heavy, reinforced with iron. With a deep breath, Rebecca gripped the ring and heaved. The door lifted with surprising ease, as if its time had finally come. A rush of cold, stale air poured out, carrying the scent of earth and old secrets. Thunder snorted, ears flicked forward, every muscle tense with anticipation. Rebecca peered down into the darkness, her flashlight's beam trembling as she descended the narrow wooden stairs. The cellar was cramped, the ceiling low, the walls lined with rough-cut stone. At first, all she could see were shadows, but as her eyes adjusted, shapes began to emerge. Along one side of the room, stacked almost to the ceiling, stood dozens of old wooden crates, each marked with an unfamiliar insignia burned into the wood. That same circle bisected by a jagged bolt. A thin film of dust coated everything. Rebecca's heart pounded as she ran her hand over the closest crate, tracing the insignia with her fingertips. She spotted a leather-bound book resting atop one of the crates, its cover cracked with age. She picked it up, and careful not to damage the fragile pages, opened to the first entry. The handwriting inside was unmistakably Sam's. Bold, looping letters, part English, part hurried German. Rebecca read the first few lines and felt her throat tighten. The journal mentioned something called Operation Golden Hoof. There were scattered references to shipments, to false names and secret routes, and to the mustangs that Sam had loved. She flipped through the pages, finding cryptic coded messages, old sketches of branded horses, and lists of towns. Some she recognized from her own travels, others unfamiliar. Thunder waited above, head poking down through the trapdoor, his presence grounding her as the weight of what she'd found began to settle in. Rebecca set the journal aside and pried open one of the crates. Inside, wrapped in layers of oilcloth, were objects that glinted in the beam of her flashlight. Delicate porcelain teacups, heavy silver candlesticks engraved with Hebrew letters, a stack of faded family photographs. Another crate contained rolled canvas paintings, their colors dulled but vibrant beneath the dust. In a smaller box, she found documents written in Polish, French, and German, marriage certificates, letters, passports, all carefully bundled and preserved. The enormity of it all made Rebecca's knees weak. This was no mere stash of forgotten heirlooms. This was a trove of someone's history, hidden with care, protected for decades by a man she thought she'd known. She understood then that the ranch had always been more than an escape for Sam Turner. It had been a sanctuary, a safe house for treasures spirited away from a war-torn world. Hours slipped by as Rebecca inventoried crate after crate, careful not to disturb the fragile contents more than necessary. She noted each insignia, each carefully wrapped artifact, her mind racing with questions. How had Sam managed all of this alone? What had he risked to keep it secret? And what did Operation Golden Hoof truly mean? By the time she resurfaced, her clothes and hands were coated in grime, her heart heavier than ever. Thunder nickered softly, sensing her unease, his eyes gentle and watchful. Rebecca sat beside him in the barn's doorway, journal in her lap, feeling the slow burn of the morning sun on her face. She knew the path ahead would not be simple, There were secrets to unravel, loyalties to question, and a choice that could change her life forever. But for now, she let herself sit in the stillness. The journal opened to a page marked with a faded photograph of Sam as a young man beside a dark Mustang, much like Thunder. Operation Golden Hoof, a code, a legacy, a promise. The story was only just beginning, and Rebecca realized, for the first time in years, that she was ready to see it through. After the shock of discovering the cellar and the hidden crates, Rebecca spent hours in the barn's dusty gloom, flipping through Sam's old journal and puzzling over the cryptic notes scrawled in the margins. The air was thick with the smell of earth and old hay, every creak of the floorboards echoing the weight of her responsibility. She sat against a wooden beam with Thunder nearby, the Mustang's presence steady and grounding. The objects she'd uncovered, family portraits, silver candlesticks, letters, and oil paintings, sat around her like ghosts from another lifetime. Rebecca knew she couldn't do this alone. The coded references and scattered European place names in Sam's journal were far beyond her experience. She needed someone who understood history, someone who could unravel the tangled web Sam had left behind. After a restless night spent listening to the restless wind and Thunder's soft nickers, she decided to call Dr. Michael Green, an equine historian she'd met years before at a symposium on wild mustangs. Michael was not only a scholar, but a man deeply trusted in the horse community, a rare quality in a world full of secrets. She explained as much as she dared over the phone, her voice taut with nerves, asking him to come as soon as possible. Within 2 days, Michael arrived in an old blue Subaru, his jeans muddy, his jacket covered in dust from his travels. He listened in silence as Rebecca led him down into the cellar, past Thunder's vigilant gaze. Together, under the weak light of Rebecca's flashlight, Michael examined the crates, the hidden insignias, and the faded journal. Michael read quietly for a long time, his brow furrowing in concentration. When he finally spoke, his words hung in the cold, damp air, charged with significance. He revealed to Rebecca that Sam Turner had been living under an assumed name. His real identity was Samuel Tannenbaum, a Holocaust survivor. In the years following World War II, Samuel had worked with underground networks to rescue and smuggle valuable family heirlooms, paintings, documents, artifacts, out of Europe, using Mustangs to carry them across rugged terrain, evading border patrols and hostile eyes. The operation, codenamed Golden Hoof, was a secret known only to a handful of trusted people, many of whom had disappeared into history. Rebecca felt her world tilt. The man she'd known as Sam Turner, her father's old friend, the quiet rancher with a love for wild horses, had lived a second life that was as daring as it was heartbreaking. The hidden crates in the barn, carefully packed and sealed for decades, were more than a collection of lost treasures. They were fragments of shattered families, pieces of history rescued from the flames of war. Each item was a memory, a legacy meant to be restored. The journal's coded passages hinted at the moral weight Sam had carried all these years, his promise to protect the artifacts until their rightful owners or their descendants could be found. But there were warnings, too. Sam had feared not only thieves and opportunists, but also the risk that governments or authorities might seize the treasures, losing them in bureaucratic limbo or museum vaults, never to return to the families who had once cherished them. Rebecca felt torn between two worlds: the quiet, isolated life she'd built with Thunder, and the heavy responsibility Sam had placed on her shoulders. Michael urged her to consider the ethical choice: to track down surviving relatives, museums, or organizations that could help return the heirlooms to their rightful owners. Yet he understood her fear. Not everyone who showed interest in the ranch or its secrets could be trusted. Together, Rebecca and Michael spent the next few days carefully cataloging the crates, photographing every artifact, and decoding as much of the journal as they could. Rebecca worked late into the night, her fingers aching from careful handling of the fragile objects, her mind racing with images of families torn apart, histories nearly lost to time. She found herself lingering over the photographs, a smiling couple on a Parisian street, a young boy with a violin, an elderly woman cradling a baby, wondering if they still had descendants searching for them, or if she was the last guardian of their stories. Meanwhile, Thunder sensed her turmoil. The Mustang watched over her with quiet vigilance, pressing his warm muzzle against her arm when she was lost in thought. Rebecca came to rely on the rhythm of his presence, the steady sound of his breathing, the grounding weight of his companionship, the reminder that not all history was tragedy. Some legacies, like the bond between a woman and her horse, could endure even the darkest times. As the days slipped by, word of Rebecca's return to the ranch began to spread through the local community. Strangers drove by, slowing to stare at the house and barn. The phone rang more often, sometimes curious neighbors, sometimes voices that refused to identify themselves. Rebecca felt the pressure mounting. Secrets had a way of drawing attention, and she realized she needed to decide soon. Protect Sam's secret, or trust that the world was ready to do what was right. On a rain-soaked evening, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table surrounded by photographs and maps. Michael offered quiet support, helping her piece together the story of Operation Golden Hoof, while Thunder rested in the barn, awaiting whatever came next. Rebecca knew her decision would shape not only her own future, but the future of countless families whose histories had been hidden away in the dark. For the first time in years, she felt both terrified and alive, standing at the crossroads of legacy and truth. Rebecca could feel the weight of every secret pressing down on her as summer crept over the Oregon coast. The discovery of the cellar and its hidden treasures had thrown her life into chaos. Each morning, she awoke with the sense that she was living in a different era, a world where history wasn't something in books, but something that breathed and trembled in the air around her. Thunder, always attentive, matched her mood, moving restlessly along the fence lines and keeping a wary eye on the ever-growing stream of cars that slowed when they passed the ranch. The first letter arrived on a damp Tuesday, slipped under her front door with no stamp or return address. The handwriting was bold, the message blunt. Sell the property while you still can. Don't dig up the past. At first, Rebecca tried to dismiss it as a prank, but the uneasy chill that settled in her bones wouldn't leave. She tucked the note into Sam's journal, a reminder that the past was rarely content to remain buried. Within days, the phone began to ring with unfamiliar numbers. Rebecca let most of them go to voicemail, her suspicion deepening as the messages became more insistent. Strangers asked if the ranch was for sale, offering cash far above its appraised value. Some callers grew impatient, almost threatening, warning her that the property was a hazard, that it would be best for her to leave. Rebecca, who'd faced war zones and bureaucratic nightmares, felt a different kind of fear, one that crept beneath her skin and lingered long after she hung up the phone. The most persistent offer came from Baycrest Holdings, a real estate company Rebecca had never heard of before. Their first official letter was glossy and professional, promising to restore the land to its former glory, while naming a sum that far exceeded her expectations. There was something predatory in the wording, something that made her feel watched. When she called Michael to ask if he knew anything about Baycrest, his voice was tight with concern. "Be careful, Rebecca. These companies don't make offers like that unless they know something's valuable." As the days passed, the tension on the ranch grew heavier. Rebecca spotted a pair of strangers parked near the end of her drive one afternoon. Two men in a silver SUV with tinted windows, sitting motionless for hours. She pretended not to notice, going about her chores as if everything were normal, but she kept Thunder close at all times, never straying too far from the barn or the hidden cellar below. It wasn't long before the threats became more than words. One night, after finishing a late inventory with Michael, Rebecca heard a sharp, frantic whinny from the east paddock. Rushing outside, flashlight in hand, she found Thunder snorting and pawing at a section of fence that had been deliberately tampered with. 3 boards had been sawed nearly through, the cut ends hidden by tall grass. If Thunder had leaned against the fence at the wrong moment, he would have crashed through into the muddy ravine below. The realization chilled Rebecca to her core. Someone wanted to scare her, or worse. The following morning, Michael pleaded with her to contact the authorities. "This isn't just about the ranch anymore," he insisted. "There are people who want what's in that cellar. We can't protect it alone." But Rebecca hesitated. She had seen too many stories of lost art and treasure swept up by red tape, never returned to their rightful owners. She worried that if she brought in the police, everything Sam had protected would be seized, cataloged, and locked away in a government vault, another piece of history stripped of its meaning. Instead, Rebecca doubled down on security. She changed the locks, rigged motion sensor lights around the barn, and kept Thunder stabled close at night. She and Michael worked in shifts, sleeping in the tack room and keeping watch with old thermoses of black coffee and a baseball bat propped behind the door. The strain wore on both of them, but Thunder's steady presence gave them hope. His unflinching loyalty, a reminder that courage sometimes came in the most unexpected forms. But the pressure didn't let up. Baycrest Holdings sent another letter, this time with a veiled threat. "Our company has deep resources and many partners in the county. We strongly advise you to reconsider your position for your own well-being." Rebecca felt the walls closing in, her options narrowing with each passing day. One evening, as a summer thunderstorm rumbled over the hills, Rebecca sat in the barn with Thunder, running her hands over his scarred neck, searching for comfort. She wondered if she had the strength to see this fight through to the end, or if the legacy Sam had entrusted her with would be lost to fear, intimidation, and greed. But as the rain battered the tin roof and Thunder pressed his muzzle into her palm, Rebecca felt a surge of resolve. She thought of the families whose lives had been torn apart, the histories hidden in crates below her feet, the promises Sam had made. She couldn't walk away, not now. No matter the risk, she owed it to Sam, to herself, and to all those whose voices echoed in the dark. The fight for the ranch, and the truth, was only beginning. Rebecca had never felt such a relentless pressure. Every day on the ranch weighed down by unseen eyes and the constant threat of Baycrest Holdings closing in. Yet the legacy in the cellar was too important to surrender. She could not allow the treasures and histories to be snatched away and disappear behind locked doors, their meaning lost to bureaucracy or greed. Michael's presence was a steadying force. They had fallen into a quiet partnership, sharing silent meals in the kitchen, patrolling the property at odd hours, and always returning to the cellar to check on the crates, as if their mere presence could ward off danger. But Rebecca knew this standoff couldn't last. As July burned hotter, the pressure grew more menacing. Baycrest's men drove by more often, and some nights the gate was left swinging. Evidence that someone had been trespassing. Each time, Thunder's agitation would precede trouble. His keen instincts had become their first warning system. Rebecca would find him standing like a sentinel outside the barn, ears pricked, eyes tracking every rustle in the brush. One evening, after checking the barn locks for the third time, Rebecca lingered over Sam's journal. Her hands traced the worn leather, pausing on a section she hadn't noticed before. A final letter addressed, "For whoever carries this forward." Sam's voice emerged from the page, tender and raw, urging courage, hope, and the conviction that the past should serve as a lantern, not a burden. Rebecca drew strength from his words, the weight of responsibility settling deeper, sharper, but also brighter. Determined to protect Sam's legacy, Rebecca and Michael began to develop a plan. They could not move the artifacts by day. The risk was too high with Baycrest's surveillance and curious neighbors. But if they worked together, using the cover of darkness and the natural terrain, perhaps they could quietly ferry the treasures to safety. They started by mapping the property and surrounding forest. Michael's experience with equine roots and Rebecca's military instincts blending seamlessly. Rebecca selected the path, an old trail running through dense fir and cedar, hidden from the main road, leading to a friend's secluded property several miles away. It would be slow, but it was the only way. The next challenge was transportation. Thunder was strong, reliable, and uncommonly intelligent, but the crates were heavy, and the trail treacherous after rain. They recruited 2 other mustangs from a neighboring ranch, sensible, sure-footed mares named Sage and Willow, whose owners, friends of Rebecca's, agreed to lend them in exchange for a promise of secrecy. Each horse was fitted with custom saddlebags, carefully balanced to minimize strain. With only the trusted, the plan took shape. Michael reached out quietly to a few more locals, neighbors who remembered Sam with respect, old ranch hands who could keep a secret and who knew the terrain as well as Rebecca. They gathered at dusk a few nights before the operation, standing in the barn while Rebecca explained the stakes. The artifacts were not just valuable, but priceless pieces of family history, deserving to be protected and, if possible, returned to the world. The group listened in silence, accepting the burden as if it were their own. Night after night, they rehearsed. Each step became routine. Crates loaded, saddlebags secured, every sound measured, and every flashlight beam kept low. Thunder led the way during these dry runs, never faltering, his composure infecting the other mustangs and the humans alike. It was as if he understood the gravity of the mission, responding to Rebecca's gentle commands with absolute focus. On the eve of the operation, Rebecca found herself alone in the barn. She opened Sam's journal to the final pages and found one last message, written in a trembling hand. "To protect is not to hide," Sam had written, "but to carry forward with courage, knowing that the story does not end with us. Let the light outlast the shadows." The words cut through her exhaustion, leaving her bracing herself with quiet determination. Rain began to patter on the roof, growing heavier as midnight approached. Rebecca spent the final hour checking every detail, the route, the supplies, the crates themselves. She stroked Thunder's mane, whispering thanks for his loyalty and spirit. Michael found her there, kneeling in the straw, and they stood together for a moment, sharing the silence, understanding that the hours ahead would test them all. As the storm reached its height, Rebecca gathered the team. They moved like shadows, each member taking up their position without a word. The crates were loaded, the mustangs ready, the forest trail beckoning, a narrow, twisting path into uncertainty, but also, perhaps, into safety. Outside, the rain masked their movements. Inside, Rebecca's heart hammered with fear and hope in equal measure. She knew the journey would not be easy, that Baycrest would not give up easily, that some dangers waited in the darkness ahead. But she had Sam's courage, Thunder's trust, and the determination of a small group who believed the past was worth saving. It was time to move. The legacy was now in their hands. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the Oregon woods into a world of shifting shadows and muted sounds. Rebecca led Thunder from the barn, her headlamp barely piercing the gloom. Behind her, Michael checked the cinches on Sage and Willow, their breaths steaming in the cold night air. Each horse bore the weight of history, crates filled with artifacts and memories swaddled in oilcloth, every bundle a fragile link to the past. Their small team, a handful of trusted locals, moved with quiet urgency, shrouded in rain-slicked ponchos and determination. The plan was simple, but every step felt fraught with risk. They would avoid the roads, following deer trails and forgotten logging tracks through the forest. The storm, though fierce, was a blessing. It would mask their movement, obscure their tracks, and, if luck held, keep any unwanted eyes from noticing their departure. The real threat was not the weather or the dark, but the human danger lurking somewhere beyond the tree line. Thunder took the lead, ears pricked, hooves silent on the soft earth. His confidence was a beacon, guiding the others as they slipped deeper into the woods. Rebecca trusted him implicitly. He seemed to know where the path was firm and where it would suck them down into mud. Sage and Willow followed close behind, never balking, the mustang's wild blood lending them the sure-footedness needed for such a night. The first mile was tense but uneventful. Rebecca's senses were tuned to every snapping twig, every sudden hush of wind in the trees. She remembered Sam's stories, how the mustangs had carried secrets across enemy lines, relying on their instinct and intelligence more than any map. Now, with every step, she felt herself becoming part of that story, a living thread in a tapestry that stretched back generations. As the team rounded a bend in the trail, a flash of movement caught Rebecca's eye. Thunder stopped short, muscles bunching beneath his wet hide. In the silence, Rebecca heard the unmistakable metallic clink of something out of place, a chain, a tool, or perhaps a trap. She motioned for the group to halt, heart thudding. Thunder sidestepped, pressing his muzzle to Rebecca's shoulder, warning her to hold back. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the path ahead. In the brief glare, Rebecca spotted what Thunder had sensed, a crude snare, wire stretched across the trail, nearly invisible in the dark. Someone had been here. Someone who wanted to slow them or worse. Michael, alert to the danger, quietly disabled the trap, hands steady even as thunder rumbled overhead. With the threat averted, they pressed on, nerves fraying with every mile. The rain began to ease, replaced by a damp fog that muffled all sound. Somewhere in the woods behind them, a branch snapped, a human misstep, too heavy for any deer or raccoon. Rebecca's pulse spiked. She glanced at Michael, who nodded grimly, confirming her fear. They were being followed. Rebecca urged the group forward, fighting panic. Thunder, reading her mood, picked up his pace, his hooves sure even on the slick ground. Twice more they found evidence of sabotage, tire ruts near a narrow ravine, footprints where none should have been. But each time, Thunder guided them away from danger, finding side trails hidden by brambles or looping back through stands of ancient cedar. The forest seemed to close in, alive with secrets. Every so often, Rebecca would look back and see only darkness, but she knew better than to believe they were alone. The Baycrest men were out there, somewhere close, clever enough to lay traps, but not clever enough to outsmart a mustang's senses. Hours passed. The team was soaked to the bone, exhaustion creeping into their limbs, but none complained. They pressed on, drawn forward by necessity and the unspoken weight of what they carried. Each crate bumped against a saddle was a reminder of why they risked so much. Names and faces lost to time, stories yearning to be brought home. In the darkest part of the night, they approached a narrow gully, one last obstacle before the outpost. Rebecca hesitated, scanning the ground for signs of ambush. Thunder pawed the earth, nostrils flaring, then swung sharply left, forcing the entire group off the main trail. As they rounded a copse of ferns, they heard angry shouts behind them. Baycrest's men, finding their ambush site empty, cursing into the storm. Thunder led them onward, forging a new path through the undergrowth, every muscle in his body taut with alertness. Rebecca followed, heart pounding, gratitude mingling with fear. By the time they reached the clearing where the outpost stood, a dilapidated forest cabin, light flickering in its single window. The sky was turning pale with the promise of dawn. They had made it. Against all odds, through rain and darkness and human threat, the group had protected Sam's legacy one more night. As Rebecca slid from Thunder's back, her legs shaky, she pressed her forehead to his neck, silent thanks passing between them. The journey was not over, but for now, they had survived. Thunder, steadfast and unbreakable, had saved them all. Dawn crept over the treetops, washing the forest in a pale, silvery light. Rebecca could hardly believe they had made it to the remote outpost with every crate intact, their group exhausted but unbroken. The old cabin stood like a stubborn survivor, its weathered planks and mossy roof barely visible through the lifting fog. For a moment, there was only the sound of the mustang's heavy breathing, the distant call of a jay, and the soft hush of rain dripping from the leaves. Inside, the team moved quickly. Crates were lifted from the horses and stacked against the back wall, out of sight from the windows. Michael checked and double-checked the door, bolting it tight while two locals swept away any sign of their arrival. Rebecca knelt beside Thunder, brushing mud from his legs, feeling the tremor of adrenaline still running through her own body. She wanted to believe they were safe now, that the long, tense ride through darkness had earned them a brief moment of peace. But safety was never more than an illusion. It came in a flash, a sharp metallic clatter at the edge of the clearing, a shout that sliced the morning stillness. Rebecca spun toward the sound, just as a pair of black SUVs tore into view, skidding to a halt on the soft earth. Baycrest Holdings had found them after all. Simon Cole, the company's ruthless head, stepped out first. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his suit immaculate despite the mud, his eyes cold and unreadable. Behind him, a half-dozen men fanned out, their movements practiced and precise, each one carrying the weight of threat without saying a word. One had a heavy flashlight, another a crowbar, and at least two more were visibly armed. Rebecca's team froze, each member instinctively shielding the crates or the horses as best they could. Michael edged closer to Rebecca, voice low and urgent, reminding her that help might be on the way. Rebecca's heart thudded painfully. Every choice she had made seemed to lead to this moment, standing between the past and the greedy hands reaching to snatch it away. Simon Cole raised his hands, feigning peace, but the sneer on his lips betrayed his intentions. "Let's make this easy," he called out, his voice echoing across the clearing. "We're here for the artifacts. There's no reason for anyone to get hurt." His men spread out, hemming in Rebecca's group. The forest itself seemed to shrink, shadows crowding closer as tension thickened the air. Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she moved between Thunder and the crates, her body forming a barrier. Thunder, sensing the danger, squared his stance and lowered his head, mane bristling, eyes never leaving the advancing men. The other mustangs shuffled nervously, their wild instincts on high alert. Simon's patience evaporated quickly. He gestured, and his men advanced, stepping over slick moss and soggy earth with practiced menace. Michael tensed at Rebecca's side, but before either could react, Thunder exploded into action. With a shrill, piercing cry, the Mustang lunged, placing himself squarely between Rebecca and the intruders. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. The sight of that powerful animal, battered by age but blazing with determination, sent a ripple of fear through the men. Simon barked an order. The closest henchman raised his crowbar and took a threatening step, but Thunder didn't budge. Instead, he stamped the ground so hard the boards of the porch rattled, eyes burning with a warning that required no words. Rebecca felt the courage swell inside her, rising from the knowledge that she was not alone. Her group rallied, bodies forming a living shield around the crates, daring Baycrest to come closer. Tension hung like a knife edge. One wrong move, and violence would erupt. Rebecca glanced at Michael, who was already dialing his phone behind his back, hands shaking but determined. Somewhere in the distance, the wail of a siren began to echo through the trees. For the first time, Simon's confidence flickered. His men hesitated, eyes darting between the mustangs, the crates, and the approaching sound of authority. The standoff fractured in an instant. Tires screeched beyond the tree line as black SUVs marked FBI barreled into the clearing, agents pouring out with badges flashing and voices commanding everyone to freeze. Simon Cole's men scattered, a few attempting to bolt for the woods, but they were quickly intercepted. The forest erupted in chaos, agents shouting, men tackled to the ground, and the low, steady voice of Thunder as he herded Rebecca and her team away from the worst of it. It was over almost as suddenly as it had begun. Simon Cole, hands cuffed behind his back, glared at Rebecca with the bitter fury of a man undone by the very history he'd tried to steal. The FBI agents moved efficiently, securing the area, examining the crates, and listening as Rebecca, voice shaking but resolute, explained everything. When the adrenaline faded, relief washed over Rebecca in dizzying waves. Her group was safe. The treasures, protected by courage and loyalty, would have their stories told. Thunder, still and unflinching at her side, was celebrated by all who saw him, not just as a horse, but as a guardian whose bravery had turned the tide. For the first time since inheriting the ranch, Rebecca allowed herself to hope that the darkness had finally broken, and the promise of dawn was real. The chaos of the confrontation faded into a hushed, heavy calm as the law enforcement vehicles vanished one by one down the muddy forest road. For the first time in weeks, the ranch felt still, its tension lifted, the threat gone, and the silence filled with the sounds of living things reclaiming the dawn. Rebecca stood outside the outpost cabin with Thunder, both of them exhausted, mud-spattered, and bruised by the night's ordeal. But something in the air had changed, a sense of possibility and the promise of long-delayed healing. In the days that followed, the world shifted. The FBI and local authorities handled the artifacts with a reverence that Rebecca had never expected. They sealed off the outpost and the hidden cellar, but this time, every step was documented. Every box photographed and every artifact treated as sacred. Rebecca and Michael were included in every meeting and every inventory session. The story of Operation Golden Hoof, the secret network of mustangs, survivors, and allies, captured imaginations across the nation as word spread through news outlets and local stations. The ranch became the center of something larger than itself. Descendants of families whose heirlooms had been lost in the chaos of war began reaching out, letters and emails arriving from all over the world. Rebecca worked with Michael and a small team of museum professionals and genealogists, combing through Sam's journal, old photographs, and every scrap of documentation. Days blurred together in a cycle of research and discovery, names matching faces, stories finally connecting to objects that had waited generations for their return. It was the reunions that changed everything. They happened in waves. First a gentle, cautious knock at the ranch door, then a trembling hand reaching for a box, then tears, laughter, and words in languages Rebecca couldn't understand, but felt in her bones. An elderly man from New York wept as he cradled a silver candlestick engraved with his family's crest, his hands shaking as he told Rebecca about the great-aunt who had vanished in Poland. A woman from Paris held a battered violin case to her chest, whispering stories of her grandfather who had played for his village before the world changed forever. Each return was a celebration and a heartbreak, a restoration of memory that ran deeper than blood. There were embraces in the mud, prayers whispered under the old willow tree, and nights where the barn was filled with the low, comforting sound of thunder and the other mustangs settling in for sleep. Rebecca realized that every artifact was more than just an object. It was a promise kept, a connection forged across time by the courage of people like Sam and by the stubborn hope that the world could be made right, piece by piece. Thunder became a symbol of it all. Children gathered around him, parents telling the story of the mustang who had saved the treasures of their ancestors. The horse accepted every touch and every whispered secret with the calm dignity of a creature who understood the weight of what he had carried. Rebecca watched him with gratitude that defied words, recognizing that he too was healing from wounds no one else could see. The community changed around her. People who had once eyed the ranch with suspicion now stopped to offer help, to bring meals, or simply to shake Rebecca's hand. Volunteers arrived to repair the fences, paint the old house, and clear the overgrown fields. News crews came and went, always asking for the story of the night ride, of Thunder's heroism, of the rancher who had risked everything to bring the past into the light. But it was the quieter moments that mattered most. Rebecca often found herself walking the pastures at sunset, Sam's journal in her hands, feeling the peace that had eluded her for so long. She understood now that legacy was not a burden to be borne alone, but a living thread that bound her to others. The ranch, once choked by silence and loss, became a place of laughter, music, and shared memory. Michael remained by her side, his expertise invaluable but his friendship even more so. Together, they watched as the ranch transformed into a sanctuary, not just for the mustangs, but for anyone who needed a place to remember, to heal, or to begin again. The story of Operation Golden Hoof became a lesson in resilience, a reminder that even the most broken histories could be made whole when people chose courage over fear. One evening, Rebecca stood with Thunder in the soft light of dusk, listening to the sound of voices drifting from the barn. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling, for the first time in years, rooted and whole. The past, with all its darkness and sorrow, had been brought into the light. The ranch was no longer a relic of regret, but a living testament to hope, sacrifice, and the quiet triumph of choosing to do what was right. And as thunder nudged her gently, Rebecca smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning. As the summer waned and a cool breeze swept in from the Pacific, the old ranch awakened with a new purpose. Word of Operation Golden Hoof had spread far beyond the Oregon coast, drawing visitors, journalists, and historians from across the country and even overseas. What had once been a forgotten patch of overgrown land and silent barns was now a living monument to resilience, memory, and hope. Under Rebecca's careful stewardship, the ranch was transformed into a sanctuary, a living museum and a safe haven for mustangs and the stories they carried. Faded barns were mended and painted a deep, welcoming red. The main house, once sagging and dim, glowed with fresh light, the porch alive with the sound of laughter, the kitchen warm with the scents of coffee and cinnamon. Old fencing was replaced with sturdy rails, creating rolling pastures where wild horses could graze and run. At the edge of the property, volunteers built an open-air pavilion, its timbers engraved with the names of families reunited with their lost treasures. The grand opening came on a day bright with promise, the sky clear and blue, the grass sparkling from a recent rain. Rebecca moved through the crowd with thunder at her side, his coat gleaming, his steps measured and proud. Visitors gathered from near and far, families who had come to reclaim their histories, neighbors who had watched the ranch's transformation, and children eager to meet the legendary Mustang who had helped save it all. The ceremony began with quiet reflection. Michael took the stage, sharing the story of Sam Turner, Samuel Tannenbaum, the man whose courage and ingenuity had hidden so much hope beneath the barn's floorboards. He spoke of the perilous journey, the night rides, and the community's choice to risk everything for the sake of history and justice. Rebecca listened from the side, her heart full of gratitude for the friends and strangers who had made the dream possible. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She stood beneath the pavilion, Thunder's head bowed gently beside her, and spoke of legacy, not as a weight, but as a gift to be carried forward. She told the gathered crowd about Sam's belief that the past should light the way ahead, that courage meant facing the truth and acting with love, even when the world seemed hostile or indifferent. As she finished, a hush settled over the crowd. For a moment, all that could be heard was the soft sighing of the wind and the distant call of a hawk wheeling above the fields. Afterward, people wandered the grounds, exploring the new museum wing where crates were displayed alongside family stories and photographs. Each artifact had a place, carefully curated so that visitors could trace its journey from chaos and loss to recovery and reunion. The mustangs, including Thunder, roamed the paddocks, their freedom a living testament to the endurance and spirit that had made Operation Golden Hoof possible. Children gathered at the fences, offering apples and whispered secrets, their faces shining with wonder as Thunder accepted each gift with regal calm. Rebecca watched it all, letting herself be still. The burden she'd carried since that first day on the ranch was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence and a sense of belonging. She'd found her place in the world, not as a solitary caretaker of ghosts, but as a guardian of stories, a leader of a living, breathing legacy. In the weeks that followed, the ranch flourished. School groups visited to learn about history, art, and the bond between humans and horses. Veterans came seeking solace and connection, finding comfort in the rhythm of the land and the gentle company of the mustangs. The local community, once wary and distant, embraced the ranch as a symbol of pride and unity. New trails were cleared for horseback rides, and the pavilion became a gathering place for music, storytelling, and shared meals beneath the stars. Thunder became a legend in his own right. His courage and loyalty had become the heart of the story, and visitors young and old sought him out, eager for a moment beside the mustang who had guarded history. Rebecca often watched him from the porch at dusk, his silhouette strong and serene against the glowing sky. She knew that, like her, he had found peace, his wild heart finally home. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Rebecca walked the pastures with Michael and Thunder at her side. She paused at the fence line, looking back at the ranch bathed in gold, the fields stretching wide and welcoming. The voices of children and the laughter of friends drifted on the wind, mingling with the soft nickers of the horses. Rebecca smiled, feeling the fullness of everything they had built together. The journey that had begun with loss and uncertainty had ended in renewal. The ranch was alive with purpose, a beacon for anyone searching for belonging or redemption. Sam's legacy would live on, not as a secret hidden away, but as a story retold with every visitor, every rescued horse, every family reunited with a piece of their past. As twilight settled over the land, Rebecca stood with Thunder, her hand resting gently on his strong neck. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of grass, wood, and salt. In that moment, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, at peace, at home, and part of a legacy that would shine for generations to come.